I still don't tell this story right. Every time I try, I start somewhere different. Sometimes I start with the sound. Sometimes I start with the heat. But if you want the truth of it, the part that still keeps me up some nights, it's the face of that young guard. He couldn't have been more than 23. And he did something that day that I've thought about for years. So let me just start at the beginning, the way it actually happened. It was a Thursday, late June. One of those London days that surprises everyone because London isn't supposed to be that warm, but it was. The kind of heat that comes up off the pavement and sits on your shoulders. Tourists were fanning themselves with little paper maps. Everybody had a water bottle sweating in their hand. You could smell sunscreen and hot stone, and somewhere, coffee going stale in a cart. I was there because of my sister. That's the honest reason. She'd flown in from abroad, first time in England, and the one thing she wanted, the only thing on her list, was to see the guards outside Buckingham Palace. She'd seen them in 100 videos. She wanted to see them for real. So there we were, packed up against that big black railing with about 400 strangers, all craning our necks, all holding our phones up like little glowing flags. You've seen the pictures, the wide gold-tipped gates, the Victoria Memorial across the road with the golden statue on top, catching the sun so hard it hurt to look at. The palace itself, long and flat and pale with all those blank windows staring back at you. And the guards, the famous ones, red tunics, tall black bearskin hats, standing so still you almost forget they're breathing. My sister was thrilled. She kept elbowing me. Look at that one, he hasn't moved. There was one guard closest to us, younger than the others, I thought. You could tell by his neck, the smoothness of it, the way his jaw hadn't quite filled out yet. He stood at his post beside the gate with his rifle held just so, chin level, eyes forward. Not looking at anyone, not looking at anything, just holding the whole world at the edge of his vision. People were doing what people always do, making faces, taking selfies with their backs to him, holding up peace signs. One kid, maybe 8 years old, stood right in front of him and copied his stance, arms stiff, chin up, and his mum laughed and took a photo. The guard didn't move, not a flicker. I remember thinking, how do you do that? How do you stand there while the whole world pokes at you and pretends you're a statue? I couldn't do it for 30 seconds. The clock somewhere behind the palace was working toward 11. That's the famous time, the changing of the guard, and the crowd knew it. You could feel the anticipation building. People pressing forward. Parents lifting toddlers onto shoulders. A group of students on some school trip, all in matching green caps, being told off by a teacher for climbing the railing. It was normal. That's what I need you to understand before I tell you the rest. It was so completely, boringly normal. A hot day, a big crowd, a young man doing a job so old it's practically a picture on a postcard. Nobody there had any idea. Let me tell you about the guard, because I found things out later, and I want you to see him the way I couldn't that morning. His name, and I only learned this weeks after, his name was Tom Hale. He was 23. He'd grown up somewhere in the north, a small place, the kind of town where everybody's dad worked at the same shut-down factory. He joined up at 18. His mum hadn't wanted him to. His granddad had served, and his granddad's dad before that, and Tom used to say that was the whole reason, that he came from a line of men who stood where they were told to stand. That morning he'd been on his feet since before dawn. That's the thing nobody sees. By 11 o'clock, when my sister was pointing at him and calling him a statue, he'd already been standing in that heat for hours. His feet were killing him. He told someone that afterward. He said his feet were on fire, and all he could think about, right up until it started, was that he wanted to sit down. Isn't that strange? The bravest man I ever saw, and 30 seconds before, he just wanted to sit down. There was a princess at the palace that day. Not the queen, not one of the big famous faces you'd know from the news. A younger one. A girl, really. Maybe 14. She was visiting, family business, nothing public, nothing on any schedule that the crowd outside would know about. She'd come in a car that morning through a side entrance, and most of us never even knew she was there. But she was there, and she's part of this. She's a big part of this. Keep her in mind. A 14-year-old girl somewhere inside those pale walls on an ordinary Thursday. So 11 o'clock nearly. The band started up somewhere out of sight. You could hear the drums first, that deep thud you feel in your chest before you hear it with your ears. The crowd made a sound, a kind of collective awe, and surged. My sister grabbed my arm. It's starting, it's starting. And that's when it happened. Not at the palace. Away, off to the west past the trees in the direction of the park. I want to describe the sound, but I'm not sure I can. It wasn't a bang, not the way you imagine a bang. It was bigger and softer than that, if that makes any sense. A huge, low whump that came up through the ground before it came through the air. I felt it in my teeth, in my chest, in the soles of my feet. For a second nobody understood. The band kept playing, the drums kept going. Half the crowd didn't even react because half the crowd was foreign like us and thought maybe it was part of the show. A cannon, something ceremonial. My sister actually smiled. She thought it was for us. Then the birds went up. That's what told me. Every pigeon, every gull, every bird in that whole green stretch of the city went up at once, thousands of them, a gray sheet lifting off the trees near the park and scattering into the sky. And underneath that, faint and far, a car alarm. Then another. Then three more. Then people screaming, but small and distant, coming from the direction the sound had come from. The drums stopped. I have never heard anything as loud as those drums stopping. For one whole second, the entire crowd outside Buckingham Palace stood in complete silence, 400 people, and I swear you could hear the flags snapping on their poles. Then it broke. Everybody started talking at once. What was that? Did you feel that? Was that thunder? No, there's no clouds. Look at the birds. Look, there's smoke. And there was, over the treetops in the west, a column of dirty gray-black smoke climbing. My sister's hand was crushing my arm now. She wasn't smiling anymore. What is it? She kept saying. What is it? I didn't know. Nobody knew. That's the thing about being in it. You don't get the news. You don't get an explanation. You just get the smoke and the birds and the screaming somewhere you can't see, and your own heart going like a fist on a door. Now here's what I want you to notice, because this is the part that mattered, and at the time I didn't even see it. The guard didn't move. Tom, young Tom Hale with his burning feet, standing at his post beside the gate. When that sound went off, when the birds went up and the whole crowd flinched as one animal, he did not flinch. I know because I looked at him. I don't know why. Everybody else was looking west at the smoke. But something turned me the other way, back toward the palace, back toward him, and there he was, exactly as he'd been, chin level, eyes forward, rifle held just so. The only thing that had changed, and I only caught it because I was staring right at him, was his eyes. His eyes had started moving, just his eyes. Flicking, left, right, over the crowd, over the road, over the gates, fast, reading everything. His whole body was a statue, but his eyes were wide awake and moving like something hunting. I didn't understand what I was seeing. I thought he's scared like the rest of us, but that wasn't it. That wasn't it at all. He was already working. The crowd started to break apart. That's the polite way to say it. What really happened is that 400 people who had been squeezed happily together suddenly all wanted to be somewhere else, and there was nowhere else to be. People turned. People pushed. A woman near me went down, and her husband hauled her up by the collar of her shirt. The students in the green caps had scattered from their teacher, and the teacher was screaming their names, one after another, like a roll call, her voice climbing higher each time. More police appeared. I don't know from where. That's the thing about central London, the police are always closer than you think, and suddenly there were officers in those big yellow vests moving against the flow of the crowd, arms out, saying the same words over and over. Move along. Keep moving. This way. Nice and calm now. This way. Somewhere a helicopter, low, fast, thumping over the rooftops toward the smoke. My sister was crying, not loud, just tears coming down and her saying my name and me saying it's okay, we're okay, when I had absolutely no idea if we were. And through all of it the guards held, all of them. Not one of them ran, not one of them broke. In the middle of 400 people losing their minds, that thin red line of young men in their bearskin hats stood exactly where they'd been put. And something about that, even in the panic, even with my sister crying into my shoulder, something about that steadied me. If they're standing, I thought, then it can't be the end of the world. Because they'd run too if it was, wouldn't they? I didn't know yet that standing was the whole point. I didn't know yet that a man was already moving through that crowd. A man with something under his jacket. A man who had been waiting, I think, for exactly this. For the noise. For the panic. For 400 people to become a wall he could hide inside of. He was coming toward the gate. He was coming toward Tom. I want to tell this next part carefully, because a lot happened in a very short time, and afterward the police asked me the same questions over and over, and I realized how little I'd actually understood while it was happening. So I'll tell you what I saw, and then I'll tell you what I found out, and you can put it together the way I had to. What I saw was this. There was a man near the front of the crowd, close to the railings, maybe 15 feet from the gate where Tom stood. I'd half noticed him earlier, the way you half notice everyone, and the reason I'd noticed him was that he was wrong. I couldn't have told you why at the time. It was just a feeling. Everybody else was dressed for the heat, right? Shorts, thin shirts, sunburned arms. This man had a jacket on, a dark jacket zipped up on the hottest day of the year. And he wasn't sweating the way you sweat from heat. He was sweating the way you sweat from fear. His face was gray and wet and his eyes were fixed on the palace, not moving, not looking at anything else, just locked on those gates like a dog that's seen a rabbit. When the sound came from the park, when everyone flinched and the birds went up, he didn't look west like the rest of us. He looked at the gate. And then he started moving toward it. Not running. That's what got me later when I thought about it. He wasn't running. Everybody else was a mess of panic, and this man was moving with a horrible kind of purpose, low, steady, using the crowd, letting people bump past him and closing the gap each time, sliding forward foot by foot toward the gate while everyone else tried to get away from it. I remember thinking, in a stupid, slow way, why is he going the wrong direction? And then his jacket opened. I don't know if the zip failed or if he opened it himself, but it came open, and underneath it, strapped across his chest, was I'm going to be honest, I don't have the words for what it was. I'm not a soldier, I don't know weapons. It was dark and it was strapped to him and it was long and my whole body understood it before my brain did. My legs went cold. My stomach dropped through the floor. Every animal part of me screamed the same word. Gun. The man had a weapon. And he was 15 feet from the gate, and in the chaos, in all that screaming and pushing and helicopters and smoke, almost nobody had noticed. Almost nobody. Here's the part I didn't see. The part I learned afterward, weeks later, from a story that went round quietly, never in the big papers, just passed hand to hand the way the real stories are. Inside the palace, up on an upper floor, there was a window. And at that window that morning was the young princess, the 14-year-old. When the sound came from the park, she'd gone to the window like anyone would. She'd looked out over the forecourt, over the gates, over the sea of panicking people, and she'd seen the smoke in the west same as we all had. But she was up high. She had the view none of us on the ground had. And from up there, looking down, she saw the one thing that the crowd on the ground could not see. She saw a man in a dark jacket cutting through the crowd toward the gate against the flow. She saw the way he moved. And when his jacket came open, she was one of the only people in the whole world positioned to see exactly what was strapped to his chest. She was 14 years old. And she did not freeze. She turned from that window and she ran, and she found the nearest member of the household staff. And she said, I've heard it told 3 different ways, but the version I believe, the version that sounds like a scared, brave kid, is that she grabbed a man twice her size by the arm and said, "There's a man with a gun at the gate. Right now. Tell them now." That's it, that's the whole thing. She raised the alarm. You want to know why I think about her as much as I think about Tom? Because she could have frozen. She could have screamed. She could have hidden under a bed, and no one on earth would have blamed a 14-year-old for hiding under a bed. Instead, she did the coldest, clearest, bravest thing a person can do in a moment like that. She saw a terrible thing accurately, and she told the right people fast. The alarm went out. Radios crackled. And down on the ground, in the earpieces of the men standing at the gates, a voice said the words that changed everything. "Armed at the gate now." I didn't hear any of that, of course. I was on the wrong side of the railings, holding my crying sister, watching a man in a dark jacket close the last of the distance to the gate. But I saw what the words did to Tom. I was still, for whatever reason, watching him, and I saw the exact half-second when the alarm reached him. His head came around. Not far. An inch, maybe 2. But after all that time of holding dead still, that tiny movement was like a statue coming to life, and his eyes stopped flicking and locked hard on the man in the jacket. And then Tom moved off his post. I need you to understand what that means. These men do not move off their posts. That is the entire point of them. You can shout at them, laugh at them, wave your arms an inch from their nose, and they will not so much as look at you, because their whole discipline, everything they are, is built on staying exactly where they are put. I'd been watching this kid stand like stone while an 8-year-old copied his pose. I'd watched him not flinch at a bomb. And now he stepped forward, off the post, toward the man. He didn't run either. That's what I remember. He and the intruder were both moving with that same terrible calm, closing on each other through the panic, 2 still points in all that chaos. Tom brought his rifle down off his shoulder and into his hands, and his voice came out over the crowd, and I've never heard a voice like it. Not loud, exactly. But it went through everything. It cut through the screaming and the helicopters and the car alarms like a blade through water. "Stop, armed police are on you. Get down now." I don't know if he was armed police. I don't think it matters. What matters is that the man in the jacket stopped. For 1 second, he stopped. And in that second, everyone around them finally understood what was happening. You could see the knowledge spread through the crowd like a wave, face after face turning, the pushing suddenly changing direction. A great animal panic as 400 people realized the danger wasn't in the west with the smoke. The danger was right here, right next to them, 10 feet away. The screaming got worse. People went down. Somebody's phone was still filming. That's how I know some of this exists, because pieces of it ended up online later, shaky and sideways and screaming before they were taken down. And in the middle of it, one young man in a red tunic and a tall black hat stood between a man with a gun and a gate, and did not move. The intruder didn't get down. I could see him deciding. You could see it in his shoulders, this awful hesitation, his hand drifting toward the thing strapped to his chest, his eyes going from Tom to the gate to Tom again. He was doing the math. Could he get past? Could he get through? Was this kid in the funny hat really going to be the thing that stopped him? And Tom took another step forward. Closer. He put himself closer, between the man and the gate, between the man and the crowd behind him, between the man and, though he didn't know it, though he could never have known it, the 14-year-old girl somewhere up in that pale building who had just saved all our lives by opening her mouth. "I'm not moving," Tom said, quieter now, just to the man. But I was close enough, God help me, I was close enough to hear it. "You're not getting past me, so put it down. Put it down, mate. You don't have to do this." Mate. He called him mate. There's a man with a bomb going off across the city and a gun on his chest and murder in his eyes. And this 23-year-old kid, this boy who 10 minutes ago just wanted to sit down because his feet hurt, tried to talk him out of it. tried to reach the human being, called him mate. I have thought about that word for years. The man's hand closed on the weapon. And everything happened at once. People ask me what it was like, the actual moment, and the honest answer is that it was fast and it was slow at the same time, and I can only tell it in pieces because that's how I got it. In pieces. The man's hand closed on the weapon. Tom moved. I'd been so fixed on how still he was that I'd forgotten he was young and fit and trained, and when he finally moved it was nothing like a statue. It was like a door slamming. He closed the last few feet before the man could bring the weapon up, and he didn't shoot. He didn't fire. He drove into him, shoulder down, and the two of them went into the railings with a crash of metal that I felt in my own bones. And then the shouts came from everywhere at once, different voices, hard, fast, the real armed police, the ones in the caps and the vests with the black weapons, pouring in from the sides where they must have been moving the whole time the girl's alarm was traveling. Armed police. Move. DOWN. 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 Red dots. I remember red dots, little points of light dancing on the man's jacket on the ground on the railing. But Tom already had him. He had him pinned against the base of the railing, one knee in his back, both hands locked on the man's arm, keeping the weapon pointed down into the ground away from the crowd, away from everyone while the man bucked and swore and tried to bring it around. And Tom just held on. That's the whole of it. He didn't do anything dramatic. He held on. He kept that weapon pointed at the pavement with the whole weight of his body, for what felt like a year and was probably 4 seconds, until the police reached them and there were suddenly 6 of them, 10 of them, a pile of yellow and black, and hands everywhere, and the weapon was gone, kicked away, skittering across the stone, and the man was flat on the ground with his cheek against the pavement and his hands wrenched up behind his back. And it was over. Just like that, it was over. I don't remember the sound coming back. There must have been sound. There must have been screaming, sirens, the helicopter, all of it. But in my memory, there's this pocket of silence right after, this ringing quiet, where I'm standing there with my sister's face buried in my chest, and I'm looking at a young man in a red tunic being helped up off the ground by 2 police officers. His hat had come off. That struck me. After all of it, the thing that undid me a little was seeing him without the hat. Because underneath it he was just a kid. Sweaty, pale, his hair stuck to his forehead, his hands shaking now that it was done, the way your hands shake after the danger's past and your body finally lets you feel it. One of the officers said something to him. I couldn't hear what. Tom nodded. Then he bent down slowly and he picked up his hat off the pavement and he put it back on. And then I will remember this until I die. He straightened his tunic, both hands down the front, smoothing it, squared his shoulders, lifted his chin. And he walked back to his post. He walked back to the exact spot where he'd been standing beside the gate, and he took up his position again, chin level, eyes forward, rifle held just so, feet, I'm sure, still on fire, as if nothing had happened. As if he hadn't just put his body between 400 strangers and a man who came to kill. The crowd had gone quiet around him, a different kind of quiet than before. People had stopped filming. People were just looking at him. And this ripple went through everyone, this understanding, and somebody started clapping, and then everybody was clapping, 400 people and some of them crying, and the clapping went on and on. Tom didn't react. Of course he didn't. He stood at his post and stared at nothing and let the whole thing wash over him like weather. But I was close, and I saw his jaw tighten. I saw him swallow hard once. That was all he let himself have, that one swallow. I found out the rest over the following weeks, the way you do, in fragments. The thing in the park had been real. It had been bad. I won't dwell on it because that's a different story and it belongs to different people, and some of them didn't come home that day. There's smoke in this story that never really cleared for some families, and I don't want to be careless with it. But the man at the gate, the one Tom stopped, he'd planned it. Both parts. The one in the west was meant to pull everyone's eyes and hands away to make a hole. And then, in the hole and the panic, He was meant to get through the gate. He was meant to get inside. I think about the arithmetic of it sometimes and I have to stop because it goes to a place I don't like. If that man gets through the gate, if there's no one at the post, if the boy had run like every instinct in his body must have been screaming at him to run. But he didn't. He stood. And a 14-year-old girl at a window saw True and spoke fast. And between the two of them, the boy at the gate and the girl at the glass, both of them just holding their ground in the only way each of them could, the hole got closed. None of it made the big news the way you'd think. There were reasons for that, official reasons, the kind of reasons that come from above and don't get explained to people like me. For a while I was angry about that. This kid does the bravest thing I ever saw and the world just moves on to the next headline. But later I understood something. I think Tom would have hated the fuss. I think the not being famous was, to him, the whole point. He didn't do it to be seen. He did it because he was put there to do it, and when the moment came, he was the kind of man who does what he was put there to do. There's a whole line of men behind him, his granddad and his granddad's dad, men who stood where they were told to stand. He just kept the line going. That's all. That's how he'd have said it. That's all. It was my post. I saw him one more time. Years later, and I'm not even sure it was him, but I think it was. I was back in London, walking past the palace on an ordinary grey afternoon. No crowds, no sun, just me and the pigeons and the guards standing there like they always do, like they always have, like they always will. And there was one older than the rest. A sergeant, maybe, something on his sleeve. And there was something about the set of his shoulders, the level of his chin, the way he held the whole world at the edge of his vision. I stopped. I looked at him for a long time. He didn't look at me, of course. They never do. And I wanted to say something. I wanted to walk up to that railing and say, I was there. I saw you. I saw what you did, and I've told it to everyone I love, and there are 400 people out in the world who are alive or whole or simply unbroken because a boy with sore feet decided not to move. But you can't say that to a guard. He wouldn't have answered. He'd have stared right through me the way he's trained to, and rightly so. So I didn't say anything. I just stood there a moment. And then, I don't know why, I straightened up, squared my own shoulders, lifted my own chin just slightly, just for a second in front of him. And then I walked on. Because some men run toward the noise and some men run away from it. But the rarest ones, the ones we don't deserve and hardly ever thank, are the ones who simply refuse to move, who plant their feet on the spot they were given and hold it and hold it and hold it, so the rest of us can run.